magnetic field inhomogeneities, right? And then recovery and decay occur, right?
Yeah.
When do they occur? When do we get an image? Where can we get an image? In the transverse plane, right? Okay, so since we're using shorter TRs, sometimes shorter than the actual T1 and T2 times of the tissue, what happens is we not only have transverse magnetization, but we also have some longitudinal magnetization. We have both instead of just having transverse, because excitation pulse, rephasing, recovery. What happens with the gradient echo? Variable flip angle, so not all of the NMV reaches the transverse plane, right? So some gets back quicker. When you bring that gradient, the opposite polarity gradient down, some of those spins are almost to longitudinal or in longitudinal magnetization. So when you do a gradient echo, you get both longitudinal magnetization and transverse magnetization. That makes sense. Because you're not using the full 90 to get the entire NMB into the transverse plane. Sure you look confused.
My head's.
That's why I said, don't let this, be reading and reading into it. Steady state occurs when?
This is all one T2 times the tissue.
In gradient echo, number one, and when the T1 and T2 times of the tissues are shorter than the TRUs, because remember, we're using significantly reduced TRs. Okay, so in steady state, we get both transverse and longitudinal magnetization. We're going to talk about what we're going to do with both transverse and longitudinal magnetization. Is everybody with me so far? Everybody understands gradient echo, variable flip angle, gradient of opposite polarity to rephase, T2 becomes T2 star, okay? All gradient echo images are steady state. Typically the T1 and T2 times of the tissue are shorter than the TRUs, giving us both transverse magnetization and longitudinal magnetization. Questions? Okay. I'm not beating this part into you. Again, steady state for your purposes, what you need to know about it, we covered. So how does it come about? All right. So initial excitation pulse creates the fit, right? The following excitation pulse rephases. So we have excitation rephase, okay? Spin echo is created at the same time that the next excitation pulse comes in. This is known as residual transverse magnetization, or RTM. This is what this combination of transverse and longitudinal magnetization is called, residual transverse magnetization. Okay, this happens for every time we do a gradient echo. Every time we get steady state. So by the time a spin echo gets created at the same time as the next excitation pulse is coming in. Why? Because we're using those variable flip angles, less than 90, so the entire NMV does not get pushed all the way into the transverse plane. Okay? This is known as residual transverse magnetization, or RTM. Okay, so what do we do with this RTM? We can either use it towards our image, put this signal towards our image, or we can get rid of it. So we can only transmit or receive So if the spin echo is created at the same time as the excitation pulse, how can we receive the spin echo? We can do it through either coherent or incoherent gradient echo sequences. We are able to manipulate what we do with that residual transverse magnetization, or RTM. Okay, so in gradient echo, have any of you seen spoiled gradient, incoherent or coherent gradient on any of your pulse sequences? Okay. This is where we're going with this. We have just a regular gradient echo. Then we can do a spoiled, an incoherent, or a coherent. All right, so coherent residual transverse magnetization is the best for T2 star weighting. We use what's called a rewinder. The rewinder is actually what's used to rephase the spins. Okay, so excitation pulse generates the FID, always. The FID gets phase encoded. Then the frequency encoding gradient gets used to rephase the FID. This creates the gradient echo. The frequency encoding gradient gets left on long enough to sample the echo. So in essence, we're using this residual transverse magnetization for a good cause. We're using it to contribute to the image. Okay, this is called a coherent gradient echo. Okay, so this is all occurring during steady state. RTM is still there after the gradient echo is gone. A rewinder or rephasing gradient is applied. We take that residual transverse magnetization and we rephase it so that it contributes to the image. Now the RTM becomes coherent or in phase, and it contributes to the next excitation pulse. Does everybody understand that? A coherent gradient echo uses the RTM, it rephases the RTM, and that contributes to the next excitation pulse. So it contributes to the signal of the image. Coherent gradient echo, or in phase, uses the RTM and the next excitation pulse to contribute that signal to the image. Instead of just letting it go, it rephases it and it uses it towards the signal. You okay? All right. So the RTM gets rephased, hence the name coherent. The rewinder gradient is a reverse phase encoding gradient that's applied just before the next excitation point. Don't let it drive you crazy. Steady state occurs when the T1 and T2 times of the tissue are shorter than the TRUs. Okay, that happens in all gradient echoes. Residual transverse magnetization is that magnetization that is left after the initial excitation and rephasing, and it's used to contribute to the image. It gets rephased before the next excitation pulse. Okay, so it contributes to the image. It's called coherent or in phase. Since it contributes to the image, it contributes to the overall signal. So it makes it a little bit higher in signal, makes it not as, what word am I using? Grainy, not as, when we look at a gradient echo, right? They're not as, they're signal starved compared to a spin echo, correct? All right, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to improve on that gradient echo. And how we can do that is by rephasing that residual transverse magnetization so it contributes to the image. I'm sure all of you guys have seen a really good looking T2 gradient, T2 star gradient echo, have we not? Have we not? Okay, so these are different things that we can do to help to make the signal higher, okay? So flip angle is typically 30 to 45, your TR is 20 to 50, and then your TE is about 15 to 25. Again, these are short when we think about spin echo, okay? In gradient echo, we drastically reduce our TR and our TEs and our parameters, okay? All right, so coherent or in phase uses the RTM to contribute to the image. Incoherent, we are going to take that RTM and we're going to get rid of it. We're going to get rid of it by dephasing it. We're going to, it's spoiling or dephasing. So if you ever see a full sequence and it says spoiled gradient echo, this is taking the RTM and dephasing it or spoiling it. Begins the same as a coherent RTM, but we don't want the RTM to contribute to the image. Rather than rephase the RTM, we will dephase it to get rid of it. So coherent uses the RTM to contribute to the image by rephasing the RTM, okay? Incoherent or spoiled, we are going to dephase the RTM and it will not contribute to the image. Everybody understand that? So, gradient echo, variable flip angle, gradient of opposite polarity, shorter TRs, shorter TEs. Our flip angle now comes in and plays a role in our image weighting, right? T1 weighted, our flip angle will be large. Proton density and T2, our flip angle will be small. Coherent is going to use the RTM to contribute to the image by rephasing it. Incoherent or spoiled is going to dephase the RTM so that it does not contribute to the image. Pretty cut and dry, right? Steady state. Steady state occurs on every gradient echo when the T1 and T2 times are shorter than the TRs that are used. Everybody with me up to this point? Any questions? Any confusions? Yes, no, maybe?
When do we use coherent or incoherent?
It depends. Typically the incoherent, wait, how many of you guys have done adrenals? We do in phase and out of phase, is that? Okay, okay, those are gradient echoes. They're typically done in the abdomen, so they're breath holds, okay? So depending on the anatomy, depending on the timing, we use them a lot in MRA. How many of you have seen MRA? MRA, when we typically do a mask or, you know, a dry run without contrast, right? Then we do another run. When we do the dry run, it's black, right? Typically those are spoiled. Makes them, they're a little bit faster. Okay, then we add the contrast, we run that same sequence over again, and then, I don't know if your system, in my system, I can go post-processing and I can take the with contrast images and then subtract the non-contrast images, put them right over. Are you guys familiar with subtraction technique? Okay, I'm an old school tech, so we used to do it with the film on top of a film back in the day when I did specials. we would do an entire run of non-contrast, 20 films, go in the darkroom, one at a time. Then we would do that same set with contrast, boom, 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 take 20 more images. Then we would take one of the non-contrast images, put it on top of the contrast image on a subtraction machine, and another film on top of it. It was really archaic. Now, all of that gets done digitally by a computer. Okay, but back in the day, so the same principle applies to like what we do after pre-contrast and then the post-contrast. In my UMGE, did you do any post-processing on carotids or anything like that? So we would take the contrast images, subtract out the non-contrast, and then it would give you, all it does is overlies and it gets rid of all that background crap. And it really highlights just the vessel, okay, just the contrast portion of it. So, again, it all depends on your system, it all depends on the body part that's being imaged, but start being more aware, like looking at.
Is that just the MIPing part? Because all they do is just run it and then,
Well,
or is it
if you want to
subtracted
get a
away?
clear one, you can take, like with my GE system, I can do a subtraction, I can take the with contrast and subtract the non-contrast to get a little bit, it adds contrast to it, because it gets rid of everything in the background and it makes the contrast brighter. Again, I don't know Siemens or Philips, so I don't know. Are you guys doing MRIs? One or two?
We do MRIs, but when we go to MIP, we can just window level it so the vessel will come out. We don't, I mean, so I don't know
You
if that's.
subtract-
different viewing system, you just
Yeah,
cut out
we just
what we
window
don't
level.
And what's it, you're on Siemens?
It's like,
No.
You're on
it's like a print screen. It's
Oh,
like
3G,
just
that's
trim
more,
around,
yeah.
manually trim around the vessel.
Well, yeah, we
It's
will do that.
very familiar.
So basically, the takeaway here
Quick phone.
tonight with gradient echo, we reviewed what gradient echo is. We went into steady state. We know what steady state is, right?
Every time you use computer, right? Gradient echo.
Great, correct. Every time you do a gradient echo, it's produced in a steady state. Okay? All right, so coherent uses the RTM by rephasing it to contribute to the signal of the image. Incoherent or spoiled gradient, you dephase the RTM so it does not contribute to the image. So through digitized RF, we can control both frequency and phase of how the RF is generated. The receive coil can also be programmed to receive only a specific phase and frequency of RF. So if RTM is encoded with a different RF phase, the coil will not receive it. Okay? So it can be done using just like a dephasing RF, and that dephasing RF can be programmed so that the coil does not pick up that signal. Okay? It will not even receive it. Flip angle 30 to 45. Your TRs are again 20 to 50, but your TE is 5 to 10. Good. Gradient spoiling. It uses all three gradients to dephase the RTM. Since gradients are not good for removing your T2 star info, there is more T2 star weighting data. It's not at all a T1. It's not true of a T1. Okay, it's more of a T2 star, your spoiled gradient. And again, we use those more in MRAs, in contrast enhanced MRAs.
So there was something in the PowerPoint that But I have printed up with.
The Han?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna.
I'm not, no, it's really nothing to. So, inversion recovery begins with a 180 rephasing pulse, followed by excitation pulse, and then followed by the 180 rephasing pulse. It can be a fast spin echo, which would be multiple 180s, okay?
So 180, 90, 180.
180, 90, 180, or 180, 90, 180, 180, 180 for fast spin echo,
Okay.
okay? Two types of inversion recovery, stirs and flares. Stirs are used,
So, modified back.
how do we do that?
Small.
Remember, if you answer, be prepared to continue to answer. How do we get a stir? What controls nulling that fat, Jamari?
Short TI, short inversion.
Long, short TI?
Yes, why?
Short conversion time.
Why? Go back to elementary, what,
Because the live T1 recovery occurs during this interval before it's activated.
MRI is based upon,
Short.
okay, so the T1 and T2 times of fat are, therefore we use a,
Long. But to what?
to no fat,
To nullify short?
you just said.
But we
T1
don't-
and T2 times of fat in water are short.
Right.
In order to null fat, we're gonna use a short inversion time.
Okay.
That is called a stir.
Sure.
A flare uses a long TI because the T1 and T2 times of water are long. Stirs are typically weighted, how are they weighted? T1. Flares are T2.
And
PD or T2. Okay, spin echo, 90-degree excitation pulse, followed by a 180 rephasing pulse. Fast spin echo, 90-degree excitation pulse, followed by multiple 180 rephasing pulses. The rephasing pulses are used to, they fill multiple lines of K-space, making them a faster pulse sequence, times are shorter. What about the TE in fast spin echo? The TE in a fast spin echo is what? It's an effective TE. What does that mean?
The average out. This is not the
It's,
truth.
it's an average, because remember, you're gonna set a TE, but you're not gonna get that TE every single time. The higher echo train length, or the more 180s we use, what happens to the image?
Blur.
Blurry. Why?
Further from what?
Correct. You get more TEs that are not true for the wrong TE than you do for the TE that you set. This creates your image kind of all over the place. It could be averaged, like let's say you use 27. You're using 27 TEs that can vary anywhere between 10 to 20 below what you set, 10 to 20 above what you set. So the rule is, if we're doing fast spin echo T1, what about our TE? Our echo train line.
Short.
Why?
You don't want to diminish the T1.
Correct. We don't want a lot of TE averaging to diminish our T1. If we're doing a proton density weighted, what about our echo train line? a little longer, right. So let's just say a medium, between 7 and 10, 11, okay? We're doing a T2 weighted. It can be longer, it can be above 12. Again, I've seen techs put it all the way up to 27. Typically, where I'm scanning, our Equitrain length is on a T2 weighted is between probably 12 and 20. Okay? What else? Parameters. If I want to gain more signal, which parameters will I go to? Matrix, how?
For more signal, you want a coarse matrix,
Very good,
but that will reduce your radiation.
very good. So let's say I have my matrix set at 256 by 256, and I need more signal. Signal, what will I do, Jamon?
You can decrease it to maybe 128 by 128. No, you increase it.
So you were right on the decrease part.
Like,
Which part of the matrix do you decrease to get signal?
phase.
Yes. So if I have 256 by 256 and I need some signal, I can drop my phase down to 224, okay? The more I drop it, the more signal I'm going to get. But again, what happens? You're going to start losing some resolution.
So phase is what.
It's the phase part of the matrix that you would adjust.
Which is the second number.
The second number, correct. Very good. What else? If I'm trying to gain signal, where else can I go? We can go theory here. We can go theory. That will do what to my signal? Decrease it? Right, but if I was going to slice thickness,
You can make them bigger.
if you increase your slice thickness, it will increase your signal. But when would I increase my slice thickness? I wouldn't change a protocol. You see what I'm saying? This is theory here, and then reality. Okay, so matrix, good place to go to look for signal, your phase matrix, to lower it, to lower your phase matrix. Slice thickness, in theory, if you increase your slice thickness, it'll increase signal. But if you increase your slice thickness, you're going off your protocol and you're probably going to get a hand slap. So if you go from a 5 to a 10, or 5 to a 7, or 5 to an 8, right? You're going to get a hand slap. But in theory, yes, it will raise your signal. What's another parameter to go to for signal? In theory,
Next,
field of view, field of view. But would I change my field of view from a 20 to 26? No. When do I really increase my field of view? To cover more anatomy, correct. So if you have that patient that, you know, the field of view is, let's say, at a 15 for your sagittal knee, but you're cutting off anatomy, yes. Common sense, you have to increase your field of view. Does increasing your field of view affect your time? No. No. So that's, again, if you're not covering the anatomy, yes, go to field of view to increase the area you're looking at, and it will increase your signal. Now, would you turn around and decrease, take a parameter and cut it so you can make less time? No. Why? And I know a lot of techs out there that do, but you're gonna run it at the same time because field of view does not affect your time. Hang on. So field of view does not affect your time. Okay, so if you increase your field of view and you see you got all this more signal, you're not gonna go cut a parameter to make it shorter. Okay. Bandwidth. Which bandwidth? What does the transmit bandwidth do? How's that controlled?
The
By
slope
slice thickness.
and steepness of slope. The slope steep.
The thickness of the slice will affect the transmit bandwidth and the slope, the size of the steepness of the slope. So what is bandwidth? Receive
Is
bandwidth.
the fluctuation of the frequency that we receive? Is the range of frequencies?
It's the range of frequencies that we're sampling. Keep
So
going.
cutting the range of frequencies is like closing the window
Mhm.
and cutting it by half, you get 1.4 less noises and more signal.
You sure?
Or you increase the bandwidth, you get.
Decrease, you cut it by half. You get 1.4%.
Are you sure about that 1.4?
No, that's next. That's 40%. 40%.
Okay. What is, all right, what is another parameter? I think, oh, you said it. No, transmit bandwidth, remember, we can't control. That's controlled by the slice thickness. What is another parameter that affects our signal? Next.
Next.
How does next affect? What is next?
Next is the how many times one line is getting.
Talkative now. I like it.
How many times one line of phase space is filled.
Okay, so how does that affect signals? The more times you fill a line of K space, the higher the signal. However, what is the drawback to increasing your next? Increases your time. But if you increase your next, how much does it increase your signal?
1.4.
1.4.
What's another parameter?
Is it 1.4?
Yeah, it's the square root of 2.
Acquisitions.
What's that?
Yeah, square root of 2 is 1.4.
That's the,
Only for time.
yeah, that's different. That has nothing to do with, signal. We're talking signal. So we did matrix, we did field of view, we did slice thickness, we did receive bandwidth, and we did next. Very good. Those, but remember, when you change one, it can affect something else. You know, it'll affect your image sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. Okay?
Type of coil.
What's that?
Type of coil.
The type of coil. Very good. What does that mean?
You use a foot coil for a foot, I don't know.
You want to use the smallest coil possible to cover the anatomy being scanned. You're not going to do a wrist and a head coil.